Hello, thank you for joining me on today's episode of Put a Water in It with me, Dr. Jessica Williams. Today, I'm talking about hopelessness and discouragement. This is about when things look dead in your life, when it looks like nothing is happening, and you have dead dreams, and you're in this place of discouragement and a place of hopelessness. What do you do about that? So, we're going to get into this. This is Put a Word in It, where I apply biblical principles and biblical insights and applications to mental health issues, emotional issues, psychological issues, and life issues. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start from Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 through 19. The scriptures say, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in your hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. So here in this portion of scripture, we're seeing this mother and her son being put away, being sent into a wilderness, and she's crying because the water is gone. She has nothing to satisfy this little boy's thirst, and she doesn't want to see him die in the wilderness. So she sits over somewhere else a good way off, and she begins to lift up her voice and cry because of her condition, because it doesn't look good. And how many times in your life, in your situations, it doesn't look good and you don't know what to do, and all you can do is cry because it just doesn't look good. And so it says, she wept and said, Let me not see the death of the child. And in verse 17, it says, God heard the voice of the lad. Now, this is very interesting because she, as the mother, was the one that was weeping over the condition that she had no water for her child, and that it seemed like he was going to die, that they were going to die in this situation in the wilderness. But it says in verse 17, and God heard the voice of the lad. It didn't say he heard her voice, her cry, but he heard the voice of the lad. Why the voice of the lad and not her voice? Because in that lad, in that boy, was locked up potential, was locked up a future destiny. So God responds to destiny. He responds to the purpose and what is to be in the future. And then the angel of God now calls out to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the Lord where he is. And sometimes things ail you, things look bleak when it's not working out the way that you want it to work out, or you're not seeing that purpose coming alive, where you're not seeing what you dreamed of coming into fruition, and it bothers you, it ails you, and you hope and you become hopeless and you give up on it and you bury it and you lay it down. But see, in this scripture, we're seeing he's saying, Why are you fearing? That must mean if he's asking her, What ails you? And he tells her, Fear not, that must mean there's another perspective. There's something that she's not seeing that God sees from that situation. And a lot of times you can look in the natural, you can look at what's not going right, you can look at everything that's bad about the situation, but there's something that you're missing that you're not seeing from God's perspective. And in verse 18, the angel of God tells her to do something. He tells her to arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in her hand, for I will make him a great nation. So God is speaking to her and telling her, this is what you're going to do. This is the strategy. First, you have to arise. So the things that you've buried, the things that you put in the back burner because you were discouraged, because doors were closed, because you heard a no, because it seemed like it couldn't be done, because people discourage you, because you're seeing all the impossibilities. But first, you have to arise. You have to arise from that place of discouragement. You have to arise from that place of discouragement. And then it says, lift up the lad. In other words, arise, lift up the thing that looks dead, lift up the thing that appears lifeless, lift it up to God. God says, For I will make of him a great nation. It's not something that you have to do. You don't have to make yourself great. You don't have to make the situation function according to the way it's supposed to be. It's something that God is going to do. You just have to be obedient and follow his instruction. So it says, arise, lift up the lad, hold up that thing in your hand. You arise today. You lift up that thing in your hand that looks dead. that dead dream, that dead purpose. You arise and you lift it up and you place it in God's hands, and God will make something great of that thing. God will do the work as you do your part to arise. And another part in this is that she didn't know that there was a well in the wilderness. So in verse 19 of Genesis chapter 21, verse 14, it says, "And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink." There was a well always in that wilderness. She didn't know it, she didn't see it. And sometimes you don't know what's there in your place of wilderness. It just looks dry, it looks barren, it looks dead, it looks lifeless. But there was something there. That means that God has to open your eyes in your wilderness to see what's there. And so, what looked like death was actually life was there. What looked like it was going to be a place of death for them and for this boy, it was life was there. And so God has to open your eyes in your situation to see something differently, to see what's there from his perspective. So I say today, let God begin to open your eyes so that you can see what's there, what resource is there, what provision is there for you to fulfill that purpose and destiny that God has given you. I also want to speak about another passage in scripture where it looked like a situation was dead, but it wasn't. God was moving toward that situation. In Matthew chapter 9, we're going to look at verses 19 through 21 as a start. It says, "And Jesus arose and let's see. Actually, let's start in Matthew 9. I'll give you the context. Well, in Matthew 9, there was a certain ruler that came and worshiped Jesus and said, 'My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay your hand upon her, and he shall live.'" So this context is Jesus was passing through, and there was a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood of 12 years, came behind him, touched the hem of his garment, for she said within herself, if I might but touch his garment, I shall be whole. But prior to that, this ruler had wanted Jesus to come because his daughter was sick and dying, and he wanted him to come and heal his daughter. But between the passage of time, there was a woman that needed healing that came and pressed her way into the crowd to receive healing from the Lord. So it looked like it was a holdup. It looked like Jesus wasn't making his way toward that little girl, toward that situation. It looked like his request had been forgotten. And sometimes you might have prayed, or you might have asked for help, and it looked like you were forgotten. It looked like nobody cared. It looked like you were left alone to try to figure it out. But he didn't realize that even in the midst of that intermission where Jesus was helping somebody else, he was still going to come towards this request that this ruler asked for his daughter. It was still on his mind. It looked delayed. It looked like Jesus wasn't going to make it there, but it wasn't that he had forgotten. He was taking care and tending to another issue that arose with the woman that needed to be healed. Verse 23. So what happened when he gets there? This daughter died. And we're looking at Matthew 9, verses 23 to 25. "And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, 'Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleeps.' And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose." So again, what looked dead to everybody else, what looked dead was only just asleep. And sometimes what looks dead in your life, it's just sleeping and needs to be awakened. It's there, it's dormant, but it just needs to be awakened. You need to have the right voices around you. Sometimes you have the wrong people around you that are feeding you discouragement, that are telling you how impossible that thing is, and you're giving into it, and therefore your dream has died. But when Jesus comes and awakens, when a voice awakens that dream, it lives. So be encouraged today. I want to tell you as I end today, is that dream is not dead. It is sleeping. All you need to do is arise, lift it up before the Lord, put it in his hands, and let him make something great of it. You have to take your natural efforts and your natural strength and put it in God's hands as you do your part. And you let him make something great of you. You let him make something great of the purpose and destiny that's on the inside of you that's going to touch and impact future generations. So be encouraged today. No more fear, no more discouragement, and no more hopelessness. Thank you once again for joining me, Dr. Jessica Williams, on today's episode of Put a Word on It. You be encouraged today, and I'll catch you in the next episode.